We are going to go over about becoming a HUGO Field Service Engineer in this presentation, and we'll just go over about what the role actually involves, key technical skills, any early career pathways that might help you. But essentially, becoming a HUGO Field Service Engineer is not about simply fixing equipment. It's about supporting a safety critical robotic surgery platform in a hospital live environment. So engineers in this role are very responsible for ensuring systems are reliable, they're compliant, and ready for surgery when patients are on the list. HUGO is a complex modular robotic system that combines mechanical, electrical, and software elements. And supporting it requires strong fundamentals. You need to have calm problem solving skills and just the ability to work confidently in operating theaters. This role specifically, it sits in between IT, engineering, and just clinical workflow. And in this presentation, we'll walk through what it realistically takes to becoming a HUGO Field Service Engineer, and we'll cover some of the background skills, training expectations, and on-the-job realities in this role. So this is not some kind of recruitment pitch. It's just a breakdown to help you decide whether this path might fit your interest or strength. What the role actually involves. A HUGO Field Service Engineer supports robotic surgery systems that are actively used on patients. What this means is the stakes are high. Engineers perform preventive maintenance, they troubleshoot faults and support installations, and they respond to breakdowns that may affect surgical schedules. So it's a very, very significant role. Much of the role involves working in operating theaters, alongside clinical staff. Engineers must understand not only the system, but also the clinical context in which it's used. Communication, professionalism, and situational awareness of what's going on. They're all just as important as becoming a good engineer with good technical skills. The role involves documentation, compliance, and adherence to strict procedures. You're not just improvising fixes, you're following guidelines, test data sheets, and safety rules that are designed to protect the patient safety. So this environment suits engineers who are very methodical in how they approach their repairs. They're very calm under pressure and just comfortable taking responsibility. There's not really a single educational background to becoming a HUGO Field Service Engineer. There's not a single academic path that takes you there. Of course, the most obvious route would be doing biomedical engineering, but many engineers come from different engineering backgrounds. Some come from electrical, mechanical, mechatronics, and even IT-focused engineers can transition successfully. What matters a lot is this very solid grounding in engineering fundamentals, understanding how systems work, and just troubleshooting logically, and working safely around electrical and mechanical equipment. University theory could help you, but I think hands-on experience is a lot more valuable. Hospitals and OEMs, they value engineers who can learn quickly, who can follow procedures, and I think one of the most important thing is be able to communicate clearly as well, because most of the time you'll be liaising with clinical staff and with your team. If you've worked with medical devices already, you're already working in a hospital, you're already working with complex equipments and safety critical systems, perhaps ventilators. You already have transferable skills, that apply directly to robotic surgery support. In terms of key technical skills, supporting HUGO requires engineers to think at a system level. Faults are rarely isolated to a single component. Engineers must understand how arm cards, towers, consoles, and the peripherals all interact. And you also have a certain level degree of IT concepts, which is very important. And engineers interact with the software, the data connections, and diagnostic tools. I'm not saying you need to be a programmer, but you must be confident with navigating menus, the logs, and system states. Mechanical awareness is also very important. Robotic arms, the joints, and instruments experience wear and stress. So you need to recognize any abnormal behaviors before it becomes a failure. But I believe most of the stuff you learn will come on from the training you receive before you actually go on site and start working on the device. HUGO Field Service Engineers, they go a very structured OEM training, like I've mentioned in the previous slide, before they actually start supporting the clinical systems. So there's an actual sequential training procedure before you actually go start supporting the systems. It's a mixture of classroom style learning and hands-on practice with the training systems. Engineers are assessed to ensure that they can follow the procedures accurately and safely. And the certification is not just a formality, it defines what level of support an engineer is authorized to provide. Until the engineers become certified, you won't be able to touch these systems on your own. You're gonna start with shadowing experienced colleagues in your region, and you're probably have to reach a minimum number of hours, depending on what region you are. And what this means is it just protects the patients and ensures just consistent support quality throughout all repairs. With the early career pathways, most HUGO Field Service Engineers, they don't start directly in robotics, although I have met a few who quickly went from IT and went straight to robotics. But this is a few rare cases. Many begin in general medical device service roles, so on-site roles in hospitals, clinical engineering, or a junior field service engineer positions. And these early roles will build the essential habits, like working in hospitals, managing your time on site, which is a very big factor, documenting your work and just interacting with clinicians, and exposure to regulated environments. All of these prepare the engineer for the responsibility of robotic systems. Progression into HUGO support is very structured. Engineers demonstrate the reliability, the technical competence, and professionalism before being actually selected for advanced training. So patience and consistency matter more than speed. If you've worked in the engineering medical industry long enough, you'll know you'll have to communicate with patients, perhaps more than doing the technical work. So the point here is, technical skill alone is not enough in robotic surgery support. We interact with surgeons, theater staff, and hospital management, and communication builds trust, and that's one of the most important things in this role. Engineers must remain always, as much as you can, composed during faults, especially when maybe surgeries are being delayed. And the best engineers focus on steps. What's the next step to solve this problem? These are the soft skills that matter. And one thing that's not said a lot in this role is professional presence. How you speak, move, and behave in theaters when it's very busy. It reflects a lot on you and the company that you present. So these soft skills often determine who is trusted with higher risk systems. What is life as a HUGO FSE? Most of the time, travel is common. This is what takes probably 60% of your daily job. Schedules can change, and also depending on where you are, on-call support may be also required. This isn't a desk job. You have to travel a lot to hospitals, especially how big your region is. And the learning curve is also steep. But of course, as you gain more exposure to the system, you start to recognize patterns and faults. What are the most common ones? So this is for engineers. You kind of enjoy a more responsibility, more exposure to clinical staff, problem solving. And it's a very niche specialist role, so there'll definitely be continuous learning. You won't be bored, and the role can be extremely rewarding as well. It's not for everyone, but for the right person. It's a very strong long-term career path, as more medical device companies are developing their own robotic systems, and I believe this market will continue to grow in the future. Also, especially with, I believe more medical devices are incorporating AI as well. So there's definitely a strong market for that. So how do you prepare yourself? If you're aiming to become a HUGO Field Service Engineer, focus more on the preparation rather than the title. So seek roles that might expose you more to hospitals. So I believe working as a field service engineer would allow you to become more exposed to different environments and being an on-site engineer. It will expose you more to hospitals, and depending on what engineer you are, definitely more complex equipments and regulated environments. Strengthen your troubleshooting fundamentals is another thing. Learn to approach problems methodically rather than just jumping to conclusions. And I believe one of the main things is documenting your work. Not just the software used in your job, but also document your work personally. Create your own Excel sheet. What fault, especially if this is a very uncommon fault, because as engineers, you'll have tons and tons of jobs with different kinds of faults and diagnosis, and having your own master database will definitely help you in the long run. And another thing is also managing your time. I believe once you become a field service engineer, you need to become more organized with the way you manage your time. So have your own system, have your own workflow. If you're curious, just ask me a question regarding that. You can just comment on this video, like what the workflow is, and I could go more on that topic. But more importantly, develop patience and professionalism. Robotic surgery rewards engineers who are very reliable, who are very calm under pressure and committed to doing things properly, which are very important things. Final takeaways: becoming a HUGO Field Service Engineer is definitely a journey. It's not a shortcut. Although I've mentioned there are a few rare cases, but those people have worked in their own specific industry long enough to be able to transition to robotics straight away. It requires very strong engineering fundamentals, and you have to be very comfortable in hospital environments. And as with most jobs, you need to have the willingness to learn continuously. What matters is how you approach problems and how you behave in clinical settings, and of course how seriously you take patient safety. So for engineers who value responsibility and long-term skill development, supporting robotic surgery can be a deeply meaningful career. And understanding the reality of the role helps you decide whether it's the right path for you.